Welcome to Kevin's Stories. This one, okay, so far, most of what I've been talking about have been, kind of me getting cheaped by the universe or otherwise just kind of fucked by the powers that be. I'm going to get into some of the ones that are definitely my fault now. I'm going to tell the real, Columbia story I've been kind of, teasing for a while in the next couple of videos. And that one I really feel like is kind of my fault. This one is definitely my fault. This one is about me almost getting busted, smuggling a bunch of heroin into Canada for the dumbest fucking reason. It wasn't even like I was bringing it there to make money or something. I was bringing it there to bring it home again. But I'll tell you that story in a minute. So I was a heroin addict. It started at the end of tour when I was touring in this band called Fat Mama that was based out of Boulder, Colorado. So it kind of started on tour, but it sort of became more official once I was back in Colorado after the band broke up. But Detroit is where it really found itself, where it became fully realized, It's like tour was like Pablo Honey, and then Colorado after tour, that was like the Benz, it became real, but it didn't really hit its stride until, Detroit is where it became OK Computer, that's where it became everything it was supposed to be. So man, Detroit around that time, this was the early 2000s, was wild. Okay, so my spot was on Cass and Henry, not far from Cass Tech in Detroit, but Cass and Henry, that was the way it is, Detroit's different than other kind of scenes, I've been involved with in terms of heroin. It's more, well, first of all, I call it the line. Being on the line, guys who are out there dealing it. It's block by block, right? It's the guy's oh, I'm on the line, it means he's it's funny, right? Detroit's the birthplace of, it's of course, right? It's the birthplace of the assembly line. So of course they call it the line. So the spot I got at Cass and Henry, what they sold was called Horsehead. And around the block, there was something called Top Gun. And around the block the other way was Notorious was what it was called. And this, each block's run by a dude, this guy Ketchup ran the block that I was always going to. But it wasn't it's not in other places that are kind of more traditionally mob run, heroin scenes. It's the little bags that are stamped with a brand name and shit, Red Rum is the brand that killed the guy from the Goo Goo Dolls, in DC, if I remember correctly. That was that's the Woodstock of heroin. Heroin addicts will all claim they did Red Rum, the real thing, even if they didn't. Just old school ravers will all claim they ate Mitsubishis, which were this famous ecstasy pill, because it was reprinted a bunch of times. People just started branding every piece of shit ecstasy as Mitsubishi logo, because there was this famous pill early on, Mitsubishis. But anyway, you don't see those stamped bags in Detroit. It's it's basically a cigarette paper with the drugs in it, and then they wrap it up in tinfoil, and that's it. It's it's got a very kind of entrepreneurial vibe there. Yelp reviews would be mom and pop cozy drug den offering farm to needle, locally sourced farm to nostril fare. It's very it does kind of have that vibe. It's it feels a little more kind of local than other scenes where it's just these bags that are stamped or whatever. But anyway, yeah, Detroit was lawless around that time. I remember I'm gonna do a video about people who should have robbed me but didn't, and I came across a lot in that time, because there was these huge swaths where it's either there'd be a bunch of police and it'd be hot as shit and everyone would be getting their car taken away from him, this guy, or it'd be like complete lawlessness. Like I came across like 8 in the morning. I came across like literally 25 guys like roll up on me, and I'm like, oh shit, you know, like maybe I'm gonna get jumped, and they're all like hitting a crack stem, and it's like, you know, like casual, you know, just like guys like smoking, except they're like hitting the stem, you know, and they're like, and you know, they just start talking to me, and I was like, yeah, I'm looking for, you know, the horsehead guys, you know, the guys on the line. They're like, oh yeah, they're not out yet, and one of them like just like hands me the stem, you know. It's like I don't want to be rude, you know, so I'm all right, I guess here we go. And so I just start like, you know, partying with these random dudes, this huge group, you know, like of like 25 guys just on the street, you know. And then they're like, oh, you know, it's gonna get hot eventually, like and they like talk me into going into this, like there was like an abandoned building like right close to there, you know, on that block. And they were like, you know, they climbed in the basement window and they like talked me into it. And like, I went down there and just like party with these guys. I can't believe they didn't rob me. I'm going to do a video about all the times that kind of shit happened. I remember the floor was caved in. So we climbed into this basement, right? That was like out of a Jonathan Latham novel, or like The Last of Us video game or something. Cause like the first floor was like caved in. You could see up through into the first floor from the basement in the spot, because the floor was completely caved in. But I like partied with these guys, and I was like sure at some point they were gonna, you know, like they never even asked. They like got me high and never asked for shit, and I still can't believe that. But anyway, so every like, you know, addict reaches this point in their addiction where they start having to, especially me, like, there's a certain kind of addict who never quite resigns himself to just being full-blown, like, gutter junkie, or just, like, completely giving up, right? But you reach this point where the addiction is so out of control that you have to start, like, doing really funny things to, like, rationalize it, you know, or like reconcile going and getting more drugs, you know. And it's like you reach this point where you're so, you know, like the angel and the devil on your shoulder are like fighting, right? And the devil's like, okay, I get it, you know, like stealing that used needle out of the sharps container at the hospital, which I did do. That was bad, not a good look, not going to do that again. How about this? Okay, I got an idea. How about this? Let's go get a whole bunch of heroin, but we'll dip over to Canada and get a bunch of aspirin with codeine, and we'll use that to wean off the heroin, right? That's like a great idea. Oh my God, I'm a genius, you know? That's literally what happened. I got to a point where I was like, okay, this is getting a little out of control. So yeah, you can buy aspirin or Tylenol with codeine over the counter in Canada. It's only 8 milligrams of codeine instead of like 30, which is what, you know, like prescription Tylenol with codeine is. But I had a feeling that you could separate it from the aspirin or the Tylenol somehow. And so, you know, I went to work on the internet, you know, in like 99, 2000, around there, and found it on arrowid.com that there's a way to do it. And so I was like, oh snap, well, I live right by the Canadian border. So I literally did convince myself, like, okay, I'm going to go buy a bunch, you know, of heroin, $200, but then that's it. I'm going to be done, you know? And I know I said that before, but this time I really mean it, because I'm going to go get some, you know, aspirin with codeine from Canada. And you know, like, just like, you know, because that worked in The Man with the Golden Arm, right? I don't know if you guys have read that, but it didn't work in The Man with the Golden Arm. And so that's what I did. Now, you might be asking yourself, Kevin, why the fuck would you get all the heroin and then cross the border into Canada to get the codeine? And it's like, well, let me tell you. Remember that story where I was out at 8 a.m. trying to score? That's when you have to score. You have to score really early, because literally by like 11 a.m. already, like everything starts to shut down, and there's a good chance you're going to get beat, which, like, you know, you're going to get like robbed. I mean, not like robbed, like when getting beat means like someone sold you fake shit, or flex as they call it. Somebody flexed on you or sold you flex or whatever. But so you have to go really early. So I was like, I had crossed into Canada like a million times, and it seemed like it wasn't a big deal. So I bought like two, bundles approximately worth of heroin. It was like $200, and you get breaks, so it's like you get like 24, bags or something, and I like head over to Canada, and to get the codeine, to finish the plan. And I'm like coming, I immediately get high before like I even go. I mean, before I even, like, I score the stuff, I pull over somewhere, and it's like I get high. And then I, like, wait in line to cross the Ambassador Bridge, which is the bridge from Detroit to Windsor, Canada. And they didn't like the looks of me. And I'm not surprised, because I'm sure, like, I looked like a person that was high, And so the first thing they do is, it's like in stages if you've been hassled at the border, because this actually wasn't even the first time I was. But so the first they like tag your car when you're going through. They're like, I don't like the look of this guy. And they search your car, right? So I get my car searched, and they find like, because remember like that, how I told that whole story about how I was like the addict who like was still kind of like trying to pretend like he or she was not an addict. Well, one of those things involves like, if you're going to be smart about it, you should boil water and have it with you, because if you just like use any old water, if you're like, like shooting up, it's like you can get infections and shit. And so anyway, you don't want to do that. So like part of like convincing yourself that, like things aren't that bad is like dressing good, boiling your own water, And so I had this mason jar, with like water in the car. And of course I found that immediately. I had all the H like in my pocket, my coat. So I get out of the car, like obviously I'm not going to leave that in the car. And I still wasn't panicked at this point. Although I will say this, it's like one of the things I've got another story that's nuts about where I got pulled over with on a suspended license and was getting taken to jail and had a whole bunch on me. And I'm not gonna tell you what happened, but when you're on heroin, you just don't panic. And not panicking makes a huge difference. Your decision making is so much better if you don't panic. So I just got out of the car and they looked through it and they didn't find anything but that jar of water, And they're like, "What's this?" And I'm all like, "It's a jar of water, like what the fuck else would it be?" And like they're like, "Why do you have a jar of water?" And I'm like, sustainability, Unfortunately, it was a little too early for that to work. Like that argument, I feel like if you pulled that now, it would work. You could be like, "Oh, I didn't want to," because that's what I said. I was like, "Oh, I don't want to use plastic bottles, so I just like bring water in a jar." I feel like you could pull that off now. But in 2002 in the Midwest, or whatever this was, like 2001, 2002 in the Midwest, that shit wasn't happening. They were like, "What?" So then I get sent to the next level, I graduate to like, they send you to this place, and I'd been there before. Also, this one time randomly, me and all my friends got searched on our way over. But anyway, so they send me there, and I'm still not panicked because okay, so like when you get backed up by the police, right? First thing they do is like go through all your pockets. You got any needles on you? You got any sharp stuff? They like that. But this was like, the border is more disorganized than that. It's like, it's like Keystone Cops a little bit. So like they just tell you to go to this spot, because they don't trust you. And they're like, if you want to come into Canada, you got to go there first. And I'm like, okay. But honestly, at this point, you're already halfway. If you try to go back, they're going to stop you. And then you're really fucked. So I just like went in there and I just hung my coat up on the coat rack next to the door. And I was literally thinking, I didn't have any ID in it or anything. And my only thought was, I'm sure there was cameras looking back. But I was thinking, I'm just going to hang it up here. And then when they find it, I'm just going to be like, I don't know, that's not mine. I don't know whose that is. And so I hang it up there, and I get the whole, the whole nine. It's like they strip searched me. They brought me into a room. They kept asking me all these questions about what you're doing in Canada. And I told them I was looking to buy some rare imports of like some bands I was into that you couldn't find in the States, which is because I remember doing that with my dad when I was a kid, going to buy Gene Pitney imports in Canada. And so that just popped into my head, It's total Usual Suspect shit, I'm just like sitting in a chair lying to this guy. And eventually they give up. They're like, they keep asking me about the jar of water, and I keep trying to be like, hey man, we all got a, footprint, gotta live green. I don't think they talked about footprints at that point, but I was like, hey man, I went to University of Colorado Boulder, like we're really into sustainability. And eventually they gave up, and the guy who was interrogating, the funny thing was the guy who was interrogating me didn't even see me come in. So he had no idea like that coat by the door was mine that had $200 worth of heroin in it. So he just, I wasn't even really worried about it at that. But in the interrogation, I was like, that guy doesn't even know what I was wearing or anything. Like, cause like there's this, that's the problem with the border. It's like they like keep handing you off to someone, and they like, I walked like 30 feet to get to this office. I could have gotten rid of almost anything at that time anyway. So then I like, thank you very much. Thank you for your service. Like that kind of shit where you're like kind of being a dick, but kind of being friendly on your way out of those situations. And they cut me loose, and on my way out, and I remember just stopping and like having to look around and being like, okay, this might be the moment they get me. Maybe they're waiting for me to do this, right? But I finally, and also because the guy who had interrogated me was now sort of in the main area with like the reception and stuff. And I had to wait for him to leave because I was worried when he saw my jacket, he'd be like, oh yeah, wait, we should search that. So I waited for him to leave, and finally I just like grabbed it. And, I had a debate because part of me was like, I should just leave it, and just eat it, but couldn't do it. Addiction's a motherfucker. So I just took a deep breath and I grabbed it, and nothing happened. And I crossed over. I got my aspirin with codeine, and I was like, and the funny thing was like, I crossed over, right? And I'm like, woo, I'm like celebrating. And then I'm like, oh fuck, I got to go over the border again. And this time with a bunch of like aspirin with codeine, although I don't know that it's illegal to cross the border with that since it's like bought legally in Canada. But anyway, coming back when you're an American citizen, there's just some guy who's like, yeah, come on, citizenship, American, come on, and this was post 9/11. So that was surprising because that's when he started like, needing I think he started needing a passport at that point. You could like cross to the driver's license before then. But anyway, dude, also I didn't smoke that time. I feel like, because at the time I was a smoker, and I feel like they would flag you for search if you were smoking because they were annoyed that you were like being so casual about it, and would like show up to the window with like a cigarette hanging out of your mouth like, what's up? So this time I didn't, try to get my shit tight. Came through like, hello, sir, and they waved me through. And so I had it all. I had the dope. I had the codeine that was going to get me straight. Did it work? No, of course not. Of course it didn't work. Didn't get me straight. That was a years-long battle that went on, Well, I think I've done a video about that, actually. It involves getting my cheekbone broken. You guys should watch that. Thank God for the NHS. Go socialize healthcare. Thank you very much.